Alright, I have just spent the past 4 videos on this channel reviewing this shoe, the Adidas Boston 13. And while I don't think this is a horrible shoe, one of the big takeaways of my reviews is that this is the wrong shoe that Adidas needed as far as a tempo trainer in 2025. Additionally, over the past few months, I have been talking about this shoe, the Adidas Evo SL, and a lot of the problems that this shoe has, from its marketing, which is silly, to the fit of the upper, and just overall the technology in this shoe. This shoe also is not an appropriate tempo trainer for the Adizero range in 2025. And while I have talked about why across all of these videos, I haven't really gotten into the weeds all in one place as to why I think this. So this video is going to be really getting into the weeds of where Adidas tempo trainers are right now in 2025 and really what needs to change. And to really get into this, I need to start here with the foams. Now on this channel, I have shown this slide a bunch of times and I've refined it over the past few months. But really what I'm trying to get at here is that there are multiple formulas of Lightstrike Pro out there in the market right now. Now the names of them don't really matter. Lightstrike Pro Classic is my name that I use on this channel. Lightstrike Pro 2025 formula is also my name. Lightstrike Pro Evo is Adidas's name for that foam. But the names of these foams don't really matter. All I'm trying to do is give them a name so when I'm talking about them on this channel, it's clear what I'm talking about. Because at the end of the day, from a chemistry standpoint, the Lightstrike Pro Classic and Lightstrike Pro 2025 formula are both supercritical TPEE foams. They're the same chemistry fundamentally. Lightstrike Pro Evo is its own thing. We don't really know what that is. That could really be anything. I know it's been PIBA, it's probably been ATPU, it's definitely been supercritical TPE, it's probably been a blend of those. That is a development and testing testbed for Adizero, and they really spend time and cycles there developing stuff, which then make their way back into the main running lineup. A good example of this is the foam, the Lightstrike Pro Evo foam that was in the Evo 1 from 2023 and really last year. The feel of that foam and the optimization from a manufacturer standpoint of that foam is really what led to the new version of Lightstrike Pro that we find in the Adios Pro 4. So that really is the relationship of Lightstrike Pro Evo to Lightstrike Pro. Now for the rest of this video, Lightstrike Pro Evo doesn't really matter. It's a test bed that's going to be pushing the foams forward. But when I am talking about these foams, again, the names are mine, they don't matter. I am talking about a very specific feel though. And that feel is really this. So if I put a matrix together where on one axis we have the sensation, whether you want soft or firm, and the other side we have resiliency, low to high, you can begin to map foams on this. And I've done this multiple times on this channel. If you watch this channel, you've seen this before. But the easiest way of looking at this is the left side of this has been what I would call a yoga ball feel. Foams that have a very pronounced sink in feeling. They engulf your foot. There's a slight delay in that sink and then they quickly bounce you out. On the other side of that, the right side of this matrix, we have what I would call the shock absorber, the spring shock. There's zero sink in feel. There's a constant feeling of you're on a platform of foam. There's no delay in feedback. And it has a nearly instant and very explosive energy return. And for years, the two foams that really defined this matrix and set the two boundaries were this. Nike Zoom X, the PBX variant, the one that we find in the Vaporfly and the Alphafly, and then Lightstrike Pro, again, what I call classic on the other end. Both highly resilient foams, but at opposite ends of the spectrum. And for years, as I said, these two foams really define the boundaries of this matrix. Everything else from any other manufacturer really fit in between these two foams. And I've shown that many times on this channel. But at the beginning of 2025, I had to adjust this matrix to be more like this. I had to add a whole new category of soft that's to the left of bouncy, because Lightstrike Pro really set a new boundary here. They pushed the boundary even further. The other foam that really pushed this was Saucony's Increditrun foam, which I'm not going to really talk about in this video, but that really pushed the boundary of soft. But Lightstrike Pro, the 2025 formula, is a much softer foam. At this point, I would say it's even softer than Zoom X because if anything, Zoom X has kind of moved a little bit towards center. And then Lightstrike Pro Evo is somewhere between all of these foams now. Again, still high resiliency, definitely not as direct as Lightstrike Pro Classic, but it is firmer than either Lightstrike Pro 2025 or Zoom X, the PBEX version of Zoom X. But again, that's a development testbed and it does its own thing, and Adidas really is testing a bunch of ideas over there. And recently, review websites, particularly Run Repeat, have been testing a lot of the 2025 Adizero range. And they have been talking a lot about, particularly in their review of the Boston 13, which I'll link in the description below, that the foam in that shoe, the Lightstrike Pro foam in that shoe, is the same formula as what you find in the Adios Pro 4. Now, they're basing that on the matrix of the actual foam, but I don't think that's completely accurate. I would say that Adidas over the past couple of years has really optimized the manufacture of Lightstrike Pro foam. So from a chemistry standpoint, as I've already pointed out, they're the same. Lightstrike Pro Classic, Lightstrike Pro 2025, they're the same. And from a manufacturer standpoint, the way they're formed, no doubt Adidas has really optimized that, and they're making slight variants in the firmness of the foam, and they're probably manufacturing and forming them in the same ways. They're just making one much more airy, much softer than the other. But they're manufactured now in the same ways. Whereas you look at an older shoe that has Lightstrike Pro from maybe 3-4 years ago, it probably at a microscopic level looks very different because, again, the manufacturing has been optimized and evolved. Nike's gone through this. Every brand goes through this. This isn't unique to Adidas. But the key distinction is the way the foam feels, the softness of the foam. Lightstrike Pro from 2025 that we find in the Adios Pro 4 is a much softer foam than any other version of Lightstrike Pro that we've ever seen, including Lightstrike Pro Evo that was in the Evo 1 or what's in the Evo 2 currently. The other thing that we need to talk about is this. Adidas uses energy rods where every other brand uses a plate. This is Nike's Fly Plate, but every other brand uses a plate of some sort. Some are full plates like what Nike uses, some are forked in the forefoot, some are 3/4 length, but every other brand uses a plate. Now, from an engineering standpoint, there are vast differences here in these two types of stiffening agents in the midsole of a super shoe. And to explain that, I need to go back to this shoe, the Adios Pro 3, because this is really where the Energy Rod 2.0 system really came to full fruition. The Adios Pro 1 and the Adios Pro 2 before this had a different system. It's more of 3/4 length rods in the forefoot with a plate in the heel. They were disjointed. They weren't as good. This was the real sort of innovation with the Energy Rod system. And it was actually a pretty brilliant engineer solve from Adidas's point. Now, I've talked a lot about why Adidas has rods and Nike has plates. I'll put a link in the description to a video that gets into that. It's one of my first videos on the channel, but it's still relevant to today. I did a follow-up video more recently this year. I'll also link that in the description if you want to get into the whys of why these differ. But the short of it is, the firmer, denser Lightstrike Pro Classic that was in this shoe, and what Adidas was using as Lightstrike Pro for many years prior to that, is, as I've said, a firmer, denser foam. Denser than the current 2025 Lightstrike Pro. Now, I'm not saying firm or dense in a bad way. This was a brilliant foam. This was a brilliant shoe. But the energy rod system that was rods and not a plate, I think was a really great engineering solve for this shoe, because the foam was very structural because it was firmer, it was denser. So putting the rods in this shoe allowed this shoe to get the propulsiveness of carbon off the toe, but allowed this shoe to have a little bit more twist, and particularly across the length of the forefoot in this shoe, allowed this to be a little bit softer. If you were to put a carbon fiber plate in this shoe would have been harsh and rigid and frankly kind of awful to run in. The rods, because they function independently, they move independently, that softened this shoe up across the width of the shoe, but it gave you the pop off the toe of carbon. Really brilliant engineering solve in this shoe. But when you take that same solve and you put it now in this shoe, the Adios Pro 4, which is that softer, more compressive foam, this shoe is considerably softer. You can just see how much softer this foam is. When you take the energy rod, the same energy rods that were in that firmer, denser Adios Pro 3, and you put them in this shoe, you get a very, very different ride. Because again, remember, the rods function kind of like fingers. They're under the metatarsals of the foot and they function and they move independently. So in the Adios Pro 3, because that shoe was so dense, the material of Lightstrike Pro Classic and that shoe was so dense, you never really felt it. If anything, it just softened the strike of that shoe up. But in this shoe, the Adios Pro 4, because it's so much softer, you really, really feel those energy rods kind of flex under your foot. When you're landing on the shoe, you feel the softness of that. You feel it transition into the stiffer rod under the big toe, and then you can feel the toe up in this shoe. You're really aware that there's not a plate in this shoe. In fact, there's something else in the shoe. There's the energy rods. And it's a very, very different ride. Now, if Adidas had put a plate in this shoe, a carbon fiber plate, I actually would be curious to run in that shoe. I think that would actually make this shoe more stable, because the problem with the rods is because they move independently, that makes this shoe a little bit more unstable. Not in a negative way, not in a bad way. It just requires your foot to be stronger, good foot strength, so that you can provide that balance in all the micro movements of the shoe. If there was a plate in this shoe, that wouldn't be such an issue. I would, as I said, be curious to run in this shoe if it had a carbon fiber plate in it, but as it is, Adidas uses energy rods, and that's what's in this shoe. So to run in this shoe, you not only need strong lower legs and ankles to work with the stability of the shoe, because the shoe is so much softer and more compressive, but you need strong feet to be able to really stabilize all the micro instability that's in this midsole because of the rods, because they're flexing with each foot strike. They're moving independently, kind of like fingers. So this shoe actually requires you to have strong legs and strong feet to really activate. And you're going to get the best feel of this shoe if you do have those strong feet and strong legs to really control that motion in the shoe and really kind of kick off the toe. This is a shoe that just doesn't want to roll off the toe like the Adios Pro 3. This is a shoe that does best if you dig off the toe, then kick off the toe. And again, that requires really strong feet to actually make that work. Mechanics-wise, this is a very different shoe to run in than any previous Adizero shoe. And that really is the fundamental problem with this shoe, the Boston 13, is that it has none of the same mechanics that the Adios Pro 4 requires because of that softness and that flex that's in that shoe. On its own, as an upgrade from the Boston 12, this is a great shoe. If you want a firm, stiff shoe that's going to be very stable underfoot, this is probably going to be the best shoe for that in 2025. But if you're looking for a tempo trainer to go with this shoe, the Adios Pro 4, these two shoes have nothing in common, because everything I talked about in the mechanics and what this requires of the foot and the lower leg are completely absent in this shoe. This shoe is more stable, this shoe is more rigid, this shoe doesn't flex, this shoe offers none of the training that you would expect in a tempo trainer that works with a super shoe to train the foot to actually run in this shoe. If you spend a ton of time in this shoe, which is going to really isolate your foot and not really let your foot move or really build any foot strength or really build any ankle or lower leg strength, because there is a lot of stability in this shoe, and then you move to this shoe and you try to race in this shoe, you're going to be insanely frustrated and you're going to hate this shoe because it feels nothing like this shoe. Or if you really love this shoe and you've been running a lot in this shoe, then you go put this shoe on, this one's going to feel like a brick. And that's where my brick sort of ride profile for this shoe is coming from. This is not a bad shoe. It's just so firm, so rigid. It has no relevance to this shoe or where Adizero seems to be headed in 2025. But this shoe does have a really good use case right now, and it's the tempo trainer to this shoe, the Adios Pro 3. If you're one of the many runners who wants to stick with the Adios Pro 3 because you prefer that denser, firmer Lightstrike Pro feel, and you just do not like the way the Adios Pro 4 feels, then these two shoes pair together nearly perfectly. I would say the Boston 13 is a better tempo trainer to the Adios Pro 3 than the Boston 12 was, because I think the geometry has been tweaked in this shoe just slightly where it makes it more relevant to how this shoe ran, meaning it has a much later rocker point. It's much further towards the toe. It's not as drawn back as more modern Adizero shoes. The upper has been refined in this shoe, so it's more comfortable. You're going to have more durable outsole in this shoe. And a lot of what this shoe requires to run in, which is kind of a rolling sensation off the toe, there's bounce in the Lightstrike Pro, but this is more of a rolling sensation, is exactly what you're getting in this shoe. So these are nearly the perfect trainer racer. But that's also the big problem with this shoe is this is a shoe from 2023. This is a shoe that's relevant to a shoe from 2023. This shoe's not relevant in 2025 as far as a tempo trainer for Adizero. Adizero has this shoe, the Evo SL. Now this shoe has been really loved by many, many people. There's been a ton of hype around this shoe, and I think this shoe is probably going to be on the top of a lot of best of lists at the end of the year. Not mine, but I think many runners and many other people in this space will put this shoe pretty high up on that. However, getting beyond the fit issues that I have with this shoe, and there are massive fit problems with this shoe that are really related to a lot of the casual use that this shoe is intended for. Beyond all of that stuff, and that's a whole other can of worms, which I've already done a video on. I'll put a link in the description. I'm probably going to come back and talk about it more because there's been some further developments in this shoe. But from a run profile standpoint, this shoe still isn't really relevant to this shoe, the Adios Pro 4. It's closer if you have to go with one of these shoes as your tempo trainer for the Adios Pro 4. This is the better option, but it's still not great. And the biggest reason is, I would say, the geometry. It's not the foam in the Evo SL, it's the geometry. This shoe has that really pushback rocker point that Adidas developed in the Evo 1. This shoe, the Adios Pro 4, doesn't quite have that same geometry. The rocker point is pushed back in the shoe, but not as far back and aggressive as it is in this shoe. So from a ride profile mechanics standpoint, this shoe is going to be much more sort of falling forward, where this shoe is still a little bit of that, but not as extreme. This shoe, I think, is a great tempo trainer to the Evo 1. If you're racing in the Evo 1 still, this is by far the best tempo trainer you can get for the Evo 1. And I've heard actually Adidas product people talk recently about how this shoe was developed to be just that. This is the tempo trainer intended for the Evo 1, not really intended for the Adios Pro 4. That makes total sense in how this shoe runs underfoot. But the other issue with this shoe is the Lightstrike Pro Classic foam in this shoe. It's the denser, more structural foam. This is a very snappy shoe off the toe. There's no rods, there's no stiffening agent in this shoe. There is a torsional plate in the arch of this shoe, but that's not a propulsive element. That's just controlling the twist of the shoe. But the foam in this shoe is denser and firmer. Not in a negative way, it's very different than the Lightstrike Pro that's in this shoe from a feel standpoint. So when I was initially testing both of these shoes and putting out my initial reviews earlier in the year, again, I'll link in the description to both those reviews, I wasn't as excited about this shoe as I am now because I was running a lot in this shoe, and I found going from this shoe to this shoe was completely foreign. I actually hated how this shoe, the Adios Pro 4, felt when I was running a lot in the Evo SL because this shoe is firmer, denser, springier, and as soon as I would switch over to this shoe just felt too soft, too mushy. I couldn't really work my foot in the proper way. It would take me a few runs to get used to this shoe and really begin to adjust. And I noticed my form was slightly different. The way I engaged the ground was very different in this shoe than this shoe. And when I went from this shoe back to this shoe, I hated this shoe because this shoe is just too firm and too aggressive. Again, on its own, it's a fun shoe to run in. It's a very dynamic ride, but it doesn't have any real relevance to this shoe. It's better than the Boston 13, but it's still way, way off. The one thing this shoe will train is it will train ankle and lower leg strength because there is a lot of instability in this shoe, but it's not going to train foot strength because the way you're actually using your foot and stabilizing this shoe with your foot, it is building some foot strength, but not in the same way that you need this. This is a much more softer ride that requires a lot more engagement with the foot in the ground than this shoe. This is a shoe you can put on and just sort of bounce and roll around, where this shoe you really need to be in control of where you're landing in it and really understand the dynamics of your foot strike and really have that strong foot to really dig off the toe. This shoe doesn't really need that. This shoe is totally fine just rolling and bouncing, and that's again I think why so many people love this shoe. But again, it's a totally different ride than this shoe. So that's the real dilemma. This is the state of the art as far as Adizero's super shoes right now, the Adios Pro 4. There is the Evo 2, and I'm going to talk more about that shoe in the coming weeks, but that shoe is closer to this shoe than the Evo 1 is to this shoe. It's got a similar rocker profile. It's got a similar feel. It's bouncier than the Evo 1 was, not quite as bouncy as the Adios Pro 4. But Adidas is moving the Adizero range into this softer, more bouncy area. And this shoe is really at the forefront of that. So again, if you are looking at the super shoe for the range, both the current technically tempo trainers in the lineup, the Boston 13 and the Evo SL, do not work with this shoe. But the Adizero range does have a good tempo trainer that works with this shoe, and it's this shoe, the Adios 9. These two shoes are quite clearly designed to work together and complement one another. It's very clear when you run in both of these shoes that these two shoes are meant to work together. And that makes total sense because the Adios for many years was the premier race shoe from the Adizero range. And then a couple years ago, 4 years ago or so, they added the Adios Pro, which became their super shoe. So the connection between these two shoes has always been there, and it makes total sense. But the problem with the Adios 9 is that it's not available in the US, and most of the people watching this channel are in the US. Because Adidas has decided to only bring fast culture nonsense to the US in the Evo SL, and then they also have the Boston 13. But you can't actually buy this shoe from Adidas.com in the US right now. The rest of the world, you can get this shoe, but also this shoe seems to be disappearing. The other problem that I think a lot of people have with the Adios 9 is they think it doesn't have enough foam in it, because now based on run media and run influencers, if a shoe has less than 30 mil of stack height in the forefoot, you obviously can no longer run in it more than a mile or two. And I think a lot of people have written this shoe off that could buy it, and it would be a great tempo trainer to train the foot to this shoe because it's too low stack. I have reviewed this shoe quite a bit on this channel. I've talked a lot about this shoe. This is one of my favorite shoes of the year, and I will have a 200-mile review of this shoe coming up fairly soon. This shoe is very capable, very comfortable, very cushioned, and it will train the foot to actually work in the Adios Pro 4. In fact, going from this shoe to this shoe feels quite remarkable. You really feel that this shoe was designed to complement and work with this shoe. It is very, very clear, not just from the styling and the materials and how these shoes work with the same foam, the same outsole, essentially the same upper, but also the run feel. This will train your foot to actually be able to work and leverage this shoe. So that's the unfortunate reality of the tempo trainer situation for Adizero right now in the summer of 2025. Now, there is a rumored new shoe coming out for Adizero sometime late summer or the fall. I've heard it called the Adizero Trainer. Lately, I've been seeing some other names for it. But that shoe is supposed to be a complete rethink as to what a trainer's supposed to be. And I've heard that it's going to be as fundamental to trainers and change trainers just as much as the Evo 1 changed super shoes 2 years ago. So that's quite exciting. And maybe that shoe will be able to fill in the gap and work as a daily trainer and a tempo trainer with the Adios Pro 4. In fact, I would expect that at this point, because I've also heard that it has some new materials or more modern materials in it than some of the other shoes in the Adizero range. But until we have seen that shoe, we don't really know. There's also the Takumi Sen 11 that's coming out, which is a big unknown as far as what foam is in that shoe, meaning how soft the foam is in that shoe. But that could be a valid tempo trainer, but we won't really know until we can run in it, and I do plan on covering that and reviewing that shoe, and I'll be back to talk about that more. But as it stands right now in the summer of 2025, in my mind, Adizero does not have a valid tempo trainer, and that's a problem. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. If you want to support what I do here, go check out sagasurunning.com for merch, or click the join button to support this channel on a monthly basis. If neither one of those options are good for you, leave a comment, leave a like, because it helps this channel continue to grow, which I always appreciate. With that, I'll catch you in the next one.